Hey Quilty friends, in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this super cute Rocky Road to California quilt block. Now it's part of my mystery block of the month series. It's block number 10, and if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link down below so you can check it out. To make this block we're going to make half square triangles, and we're going to use a technique where we make 4 at a time. Let me show you how. To make the Rocky Road to California quilt block, you're going to need 4 different fabrics, and I've got my legend here explaining exactly what size to cut your pieces. So for example, for the A pieces, you're going to need to cut 2 pieces at 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches and 1 piece at 7.25 inches by 7.25 inches. You can take a screenshot of this right now, or I'll put a link down below so you can get a copy of it. So to get started, we're going to take our A piece and our F piece at 7.25 inches by 7.25 inches, and we're going to make our half square triangles. So let's place our fabrics right sides together. So if this had a right or wrong side, I'd have the right side facing me. And now this is my right side, so I'll face that facing down. So we've got right sides facing each other. We're going to line up all 4 edges and then pop a pin in to hold them in place. Now I like to put them in the corner because then they don't get in the way. What we're going to do is sew all around the edge there. Okay, let's sew. So I'm using my 1/4 inch foot to sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm stitching at stitch length 2, and I'm going to start right off the very edge of my piece there and sew right down to the very end. I'm going to come right off the edge and then stitch a little bit, lift my foot up and turn it, and then I'm going to start on the next edge. I like to do that instead of guessing my 1/4 inch seam allowance and turning, because then you might accidentally miss some of it. It's not very accurate. I think this is the best way to do it. And I'm just going to carry on to the very end again. And I'll repeat this until I've sewn along all 4 sides. Okay, cutting my thread, removing my pins, and if you'd like to you could give it a quick press, and then let's cut. Now we're going to cut diagonally from corner to corner on both sides. So I'll just take my ruler, find the top of the stitches where they cross over and meet, and we want to be right in that point there on the top and the bottom, and I'll check a couple of times to make sure it is lined up nicely. Sometimes a ruler can move when you're trying to do that, and then I'll cut. I'll just move that back in place, and then I'm going to turn and do exactly the same on this diagonal. Now if you don't have a rotating mat, you could just turn your mat. Again, lining it right up on that join there where the 2 stitches meet, so it's nice and straight, and then cutting. Now we've got 4 pieces, let's press. So then setting my stitches, and like the name suggests, it just sets the stitches into the fabric, making them stronger and helping your block lay flatter. Then I'm going to open it up, press my seams towards the dark, finger press in here. We don't want any little creases. When I'm happy with it, I'll press, and I'll do that for all 4 pieces. Now we need to square our blocks up so they measure 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches squared. So I happen to have a ruler that's perfect for that. What I do is I place this diagonal line on my seam, and then I make sure that the ruler is sitting within my block. For example, I wouldn't want it like this because I'd be missing some here and here. So making sure my block is sitting within the ruler, and then just trimming all 4 sides. Now that was nice and easy, but if you don't have this ruler, you can use a regular ruler. What we're going to do is just place it down. We're going to again find our diagonal line, and place that on top of our seam. And then we're just going to find 4.5 inches on our ruler, and I can see that's right here. So again, we want to make sure that's fitting within our ruler. I can see that's about right. So I'm going to cut it on this side. Then I'm going to turn it around and do the same on this side. So now I'm going to find the 4.5 inch mark, line it up on that edge I just cut, make sure my line is on the diagonal and cut off this excess. And then I'll do exactly the same on these two sides. Okay, and then repeat that until you've squared up all 4 pieces. So now we have our B and our D pieces, and we're going to sew them together, and then we're going to cut them into 2.5 inch pieces. Now I know some people don't like to cut these longer pieces and then sew them together. They find that a bit tricky. So what you could do is just cut 6 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches squared for each piece of fabric to not have to do this step. But I do find this quicker and easier. So what I'm going to do is place them right sides together, and if they're directional, just check you're happy with how they're sitting. And then I'm going to line up all the edges, so that looks pretty good to me, and then I'm going to pin it in place and then sew. Okay, so starting on the very edge again and just sewing along this whole edge, removing pins as I need to. And coming off the very edge, and now let's give that a quick press. So setting our stitches, and then opening it up, making sure, pressing towards the dark and making sure there's no creases in there, and then pressing. So now we're going to cut this into 6 2.5 inch strips. The first thing I'm going to do is just start with a nice straight edge on this side. Now I did make it so it was 1/2 inch bigger, just so we have a bit of wiggle room. So I'll just trim that off, and then I'll turn that around and I'll cut 2.5 inch pieces from this side. So finding my 2.5 inch mark on my ruler, then what I'm going to do is find a line on my ruler and line it up with that seam so I know it's nice and straight. I can also see that these 2 lines here are looking good, and these 2 lines here on the ruler against the edge of the fabric, and I'm cutting that at 2.5 inches. And then I'll just repeat that until I've got my 6 pieces. So now I've got my 6 sets and I've placed them so the fabrics are all sitting in the same direction. I'm going to split it in half, so I've got 3 on either side, and then I'm just going to turn this one around, which is creating that effect, which is kind of like a checkerboard effect. And then what we're going to do is take one piece from each side, and then I'm going to place them right sides together, find those seams and nest them. So we've got one seam pressed and going this way, one seam pressed and going that way. We're going to butt them up against each other. We can open it up and check that it's creating a nice straight line, and then pin. And if you'd like to, you can put a pin at the beginning and at the end. I'm not going to worry about it. And then I'll just take my next set and do exactly the same. Okay, let's sew. So doing exactly the same, starting at the very edge and sewing all the way down. I am being mindful of my seams, so I want them to be sitting and sewn down in the direction they've been pressed, so I will keep an eye on that. And also making sure all these edges are lined up nicely. Removing my pins as they get in the way. I'm not going to worry about cutting the thread, I'm just going to take my next piece and sew them together. cutting my thread and then just snipping the chain piecing that was holding it together, making sure we don't accidentally cut our fabric. And now let's press. So setting our stitches once again, and then opening them up and just pressing the seams however you'd like to. It doesn't matter at this point. Finger pressing and repeating this for all all 3 pieces. Now these pieces should measure 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches squared, and we can just take our ruler and double check. And that's looking really good to me. If yours aren't, then you could just square them up a little bit at this point. Now let's construct our block. So now we've finished making all of our pieces. I'm just going to follow my diagram and place them in the correct position. I'll start with the squares that we just made and making sure my B fabric is in the top left hand corner. So one goes in the corner there, one there, and one there. Then my half square triangles. So now all we need to do is sew our rows together, and then we'll sew them together. And then what I like to do at this point is just fold this one over, take my pins and just loosely pin it so I know I'm going to sew along this seam, and then I fix it up when I'm sewing. It just means that I don't get into a right royal pickle and end up with my blocks in the wrong position. Okay, now I'm going to sew all those pieces together. So now just taking each piece, and then I will just line up all those edges nicely. We want them lined up on the side, along this top here, and then along the other side. And then I'll just pop in a pin. You could pop in 1 or 2 pins, and then I'll just sew all my pieces together with exactly the same settings, 1/4 inch seam allowance and stitch length 2. So just laying out our pieces again and making sure it matches our image. So just, if you need to, double check the image so they are in the correct position. And then we're going to press our seams so that one set of seams is going one way, one set is going the other, and one set is going the other way, so that we can nest them all at the end. Give the whole piece a press. And because I've pressed these seams down this way, I'll press these ones that way. And then the last set will go this way. So now we're going to sew them together. I'm just going to place these 2 pieces right sides together, and then I'm going to find those seams. I'm going to nest them. Make sure these edges here are all lined up nicely, and then pin. Find my second set of seams and do exactly the same. And I'll also pin at the beginning and the end. And in the middle, and then I'll sew along this edge, and then I'll do exactly the same for the remaining piece. So now I'm just going to set the stitches. And then I'm going to press my seams open. It's always a personal preference, but I do find it's a little bit bulky in parts. So pressing it open helps. But like I said, it's a personal preference. can be a little bit fiddly to press open. Okay, and then I'll do the same on this side. When you press the seams open, it is important to press and not iron, because if you're too rough, you'll just start pressing other seams out of order, or that's not the right word, but you'll start pressing them so that they're all going in the wrong direction and what have you. So just be gentle, and then we can flip it over and give the whole block a press. Remove any loose threads, and there you go. We've got our Rocky Road to California quilt block. Isn't that pretty? So there we have our Rocky Road to California quilt block. Wasn't that a nice, quick and easy block to make? If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. Now don't forget, when we are working with half square triangles, we've cut that fabric on the bias. So be extra gentle with it, and sometimes a bit of starch does help just to make the fabric a bit more sturdy. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like to check out last month's mystery block where we did the twin star quilt block. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.